Seeds of Peace. Revolutionary Ideas to End Wars and Unite the World. Chapter 1. Global Empathy Exercises. Walking in another's shoes. What if world leaders could see the impact of war through the eyes of those who suffer its consequences? Imagine if they could truly feel the weight of displacement, the despair of loss, and the hope that flickers in even the darkest moments. Global Empathy Exercises, a revolutionary approach, aim to bridge the empathy gap by placing leaders in immersive virtual reality (VR) experiences that allow them to witness the suffering and resilience of war victims. Through VR, leaders could engage in a transformative journey, walking, if only briefly, in the shoes of the people whose lives are altered by the decisions they make. The concept: creating a shared human experience. Global empathy exercises leverage VR technology to create experiences that go beyond speeches, reports, and numbers. By simulating the lived reality of war victims, refugees, families torn apart, children navigating rubble-strewn streets, these exercises confront leaders with the human consequences of conflict in a visceral, unforgettable way. VR can transport participants to places they may have only heard about: a war-torn neighborhood, a refugee camp, or a relief shelter. They can interact with these environments as if they were truly there, allowing them to feel, if only in part, what it means to live in a world shattered by violence. In this virtual world, leaders might walk through the ruins of a destroyed village, listen to the stories of survivors, or experience the desperation of finding food and shelter in a crisis. They would witness children's classrooms reduced to rubble and families huddled together for warmth, experiencing a reality far removed from diplomatic negotiations. This deep, personal encounter with war's toll is designed to awaken empathy, compassion, and a drive for peace. A real-life inspiration: empathy through VR in humanitarian aid. The Red Cross and United Nations have already begun using VR to shift public perception around conflict. One VR project takes viewers through a simulated experience of life as a refugee in a war zone, helping them understand the scale of the crisis. Participants leave these experiences profoundly moved, with a newfound understanding of the stakes and an appreciation for the urgency of humanitarian aid. For politicians and policymakers, this effect could be magnified, pushing them toward policies that prioritize peace over power struggles. For instance, consider the story of Amina, a young Syrian girl whose life changed when her home was destroyed. Forced to flee with her family, she faced hunger, loss, and instability every day. A global empathy exercise could place leaders in Amina's world, guiding them through her challenges, her fear, and her resilience. Such a journey might remind leaders that behind every refugee statistic is a real person with dreams, strengths, and a longing for peace. Potential impact: why empathy could transform decision-making. Empathy exercises could be a game-changer in peace negotiations. Leaders who undergo these experiences may find it harder to make decisions that lead to conflict, having faced, however, virtually, the suffering it brings. This perspective shift is crucial. When leaders feel connected to the people their decisions affect, they are more likely to act with compassion and consideration. Empathy fosters a sense of global responsibility, reminding leaders that their choices extend beyond borders, languages, and politics. In the face of the shared human experience, it becomes easier to see peace not as an ideal, but as a moral imperative. Empathy exercises can also benefit those working on peacebuilding efforts, from diplomats to grassroots activists. By understanding the human stakes at play, they are better equipped to advocate for peaceful resolutions and to find common ground with opponents. Empathy softens divisions, and this is precisely what the world needs to move from hostility to harmony. Making it happen. Turning vision into reality. To bring global empathy exercises to life, we would need collaboration across various sectors: technology, diplomacy, and humanitarian organizations. Partnerships with tech companies could help develop high-quality, realistic VR simulations that accurately portray the realities of war-affected areas. Meanwhile, governments and international bodies could introduce empathy exercises as part of standard training for diplomats, military leaders, and policymakers, embedding compassion into the structures that guide global decisions. Nonprofits and advocacy groups could also play a key role by creating public demand for empathy-driven leadership. Imagine if citizens across the world voiced their support for leaders to participate in these exercises. With enough momentum, empathy exercises could become a norm rather than a novelty, shaping future leaders to approach conflict with compassion and a commitment to peace. Call to action. Advocating for a more compassionate leadership, you, the reader, can be a part of making empathy exercises a reality. Support organizations that work on VR projects for humanitarian causes, and share the idea with friends, colleagues, and on social media. If you're passionate about seeing more compassionate leadership, let your voice be heard. Write to local representatives, call for global empathy exercises at major summits, or join campaigns that promote empathy in decision-making. Imagine if, before making any decision about military intervention, a leader had to experience the life of someone affected by their choice. How might this shape our world's approach to conflict? Reflection. A vision of peace. Imagine a world where leaders felt a sense of duty not just to their own citizens, but to humanity as a whole. What if leaders across the globe saw the shared humanity in every decision they made, working together to prevent suffering instead of wielding power? Empathy exercises can bring us closer to that vision, creating a world where decisions are made not from a distance but with a compassionate understanding of their consequences. Through this journey, we invite you to think of the leaders in your own life, whether on a global, national, or community scale, and consider what would happen if they approached every decision with empathy at the forefront. Could we, as a collective humanity, take steps toward peace by insisting on leadership that feels, listens, and acts with compassion? This chapter, like the entire vision for Seeds of Peace, invites you to imagine, advocate, and believe in a world where peace is not a distant dream but a practical goal built on shared understanding. Together, we can plant the seeds of empathy that grow into lasting peace, one decision at a time. Chapter 2. Gamifying Peace Negotiations, Turning Diplomacy into Play. Imagine a world where peace negotiations feel less like tense standoffs and more like a collaborative, game-driven experience. Picture global leaders, diplomats, and decision-makers engaging in interactive scenarios that bring both the devastation of conflict and the benefits of peace to life. By playing out these scenarios through the power of artificial intelligence and gamification, leaders could explore alternative futures and experience firsthand the outcomes of their decisions. This innovative concept of gamifying peace negotiations could change the way we think about diplomacy, encouraging a deeper commitment to peaceful solutions. The concept, AI-driven simulations for negotiation. Gamifying peace negotiations involves using advanced AI to create realistic, interactive simulations that allow leaders to experience the impact of both conflict and cooperation. These simulations wouldn't just be simple video game setups. Instead, they would be sophisticated, data-driven models incorporating economic factors, environmental outcomes, social stability, and human lives affected. Leaders could play through various scenarios, seeing how different actions, such as imposing sanctions, forming alliances, or initiating a ceasefire, would unfold over time. Through AI simulations, each decision could trigger a series of ripple effects. For example, a choice to initiate a military strike might lead to environmental devastation, economic downturns, and strained alliances, while a choice to negotiate peace could result in increased trade, improved public health, and cultural exchange. In a gamified setting, these consequences would be vividly illustrated, giving leaders an opportunity to experience the human costs of conflict and the shared rewards of peace. Why gamification? Lessons from play games have a unique way of teaching us. In a game, every action has a reaction, and players quickly learn that impulsive choices come with consequences. Diplomacy is often far more abstract, where decisions are made based on reports, spreadsheets, and projections rather than on direct experience. Gamification brings immediacy and tangible outcomes into the picture, making the choices more personal and, ideally, more responsible. Take the example of disaster response simulations used by emergency workers. Through these gamified exercises, participants can practice disaster management skills, understanding what works, what doesn't, and how to react in real time. Similarly, peace negotiations could adopt this gamified approach, offering leaders a safe space to explore the complexities and risks of their choices without the real-world cost. A real-world example: simulating diplomacy for empathy and insight. Several organizations are already experimenting with AI-driven simulation tools that bring leaders face to face with the realities of war and conflict. For example, The United Nations has used a crisis simulation game that allows participants to navigate the challenges of managing refugee crises, balancing resource allocations, and maintaining peace. Participants often leave with a profound sense of how complex these issues are, gaining empathy for those impacted by their policies. Imagine if such simulations were adapted to high-stakes peace negotiations. A leader who feels the difficulty of sustaining a refugee camp, hears virtual voices of those impacted by conflict, or witnesses the rapid economic decline triggered by war might approach negotiations with greater empathy. Through immersive experiences, diplomacy becomes more than an intellectual exercise, it becomes a moral responsibility. Potential impact. Why gamified peace talks could be transformative. By experiencing the ripple effects of their decisions, leaders could be encouraged to seek peace with newfound urgency. Gamifying peace negotiations could offer several transformative benefits. 1. Humanizing the consequences. In a typical negotiation, the immediate focus is often on power dynamics, territory, or economic interests. A gamified simulation would bring human faces to the table, showing the leaders the lives affected by each choice. This shift could inspire decisions driven by compassion rather than calculation. 2. Encouraging collaboration. Multiplayer simulation formats could encourage leaders to work together, exploring cooperative strategies that yield mutual benefits. This kind of collaboration could reveal new pathways for peace that might not emerge in traditional negotiation formats. 3. Highlighting long-term thinking. In gamified scenarios, the immediate impact of a decision might be positive, but the long-term consequences can be detrimental. Leaders would experience this in real time, promoting a mindset of long-term responsibility and caution. 4. Creating safe spaces for experimentation. Negotiators could try bold ideas without real-world risks. Gamified negotiations provide an opportunity to test unconventional solutions, like integrated peace-building missions or joint economic initiatives, to see how they might play out. Making it a reality. Steps to implement gamified negotiations. To bring this vision to life, we need cooperation across technology developers, governments, and peace organizations. Here are a few practical steps. Develop partnerships with tech innovators. By partnering with AI and game development companies, international organizations could create robust, interactive platforms for peace negotiations. These platforms would be built to model real-world complexities while remaining engaging and accessible. Create a standardized simulation program for diplomats. Much like diplomats undergo training in cultural sensitivity, they could also train in a gamified platform to practice peace negotiation skills. This standardized program could be hosted by institutions like the United Nations or the World Peace Organization. Integrate simulation exercises in policy training. Encourage policymakers and government advisors to participate in these simulations regularly. By making it a required part of policy training, governments can ensure that future leaders are prepared to consider the human impact of their decisions. Call to action. Advocate for gamified peace initiatives. If this vision resonates with you, there are ways you can support the development of gamified peace negotiations. Share the idea with organizations that work on international diplomacy and peace initiatives. If you have experience in tech or game design, consider contributing your skills to organizations aiming to make peace negotiations more interactive. Every voice, every action counts in creating a world where leaders are driven by empathy and understanding. Reflection activity. Imagine you had the power to design a scenario in a gamified peace negotiation platform. What would it look like? Would you focus on highlighting the effects of economic sanctions, the devastation of military action, or the healing impact of cooperative policies? How might your design help leaders see the world through a more compassionate lens? A vision for the future. From play to peace. It's not enough to hope for a peaceful world. We need innovative ways to help leaders understand the true stakes of their choices. Gamified peace negotiations offer a bold step in that direction, blending technology and empathy to create a more compassionate form of diplomacy. Imagine a world where every leader experienced the trauma of conflict and the triumph of peace, virtually, yes, but deeply and vividly. Such a world could inspire not just the desire for peace but the resolve to pursue it. Through this chapter and beyond, Seeds of Peace invites you to dream big. Peace is not just the absence of war, it's the presence of understanding, compassion, and courage. Let's plant these seeds by calling for a new, empathetic, and interactive path to diplomacy. Together, we can turn peace from an ideal into a practiced reality, one scenario at a time. Chapter 3. Mandatory conflict resolution training for world leaders and military officials. Imagine if every world leader and military official was required to undergo intensive training in conflict resolution before making decisions that could impact millions of lives. Rather than relying solely on military strategies and political power dynamics, they would be equipped with skills to de-escalate tensions, build consensus, and seek common ground, even with opponents. Mandatory conflict resolution training could provide a transformative shift in how leaders approach both internal and international disputes, fostering an era where peace is the preferred and practiced approach. The concept, training leaders to choose peace. Mandatory conflict resolution training is rooted in the belief that peace can be learned. Through this training, leaders would gain practical skills and psychological insights into negotiation, empathy, and compromise. Programs could be based on models used by diplomats, peace negotiators, and social psychologists, covering everything from mediation techniques to active listening exercises. By placing every leader, from heads of state to military commanders, in this training environment, we create a common foundation for constructive dialogue and a shared commitment to resolving disputes without violence. This training would go beyond basic negotiation skills. It would address the roots of conflict, teaching leaders to recognize triggers, biases, and assumptions that often fuel disputes. Leaders would learn to slow down, consider multiple perspectives, and approach their adversaries with empathy and understanding. In essence, they would become diplomats not only in title but in practice. Real-world example. Lessons from community peacemakers around the world. We see examples of successful conflict resolution in community-based programs. For instance, in post-conflict Rwanda, reconciliation programs have helped to heal deep wounds from the 1994 genocide. By training local leaders in conflict resolution, Rwanda has made great strides in creating a society where people work together rather than against one another. Similarly, community mediation programs in Northern Ireland brought former enemies together to negotiate peace, ultimately contributing to the historic Good Friday Agreement. These community-driven approaches offer valuable lessons for global leaders. Just as local leaders have learned to facilitate dialogue, address grievances, and foster understanding, world leaders could apply these principles on a larger scale. Conflict resolution training would give them tools to navigate complex issues, negotiate effectively, and build sustainable peace. Impact. Shifting the mindset from conflict to collaboration. Imagine the impact if every leader approached their role with a conflict resolution mindset. Instead of viewing their counterparts as adversaries, they would see them as collaborators in a shared pursuit of peace and stability. With this training, leaders could approach international disputes with a stronger commitment to dialogue, reducing the risk of war and fostering mutual understanding. Mandatory conflict resolution training could also transform military culture. While the primary role of the military is often seen as defense or combat, incorporating conflict resolution into military leadership training could help military officials approach situations with a focus on minimizing harm. They would be better equipped to de-escalate conflicts, protect civilian lives, and consider non-violent strategies. By building empathy and understanding, military leaders could lead with restraint and caution, reducing the frequency and intensity of armed confrontations. Making it happen. Implementing conflict resolution training worldwide. So how do we make conflict resolution training a reality for global leaders? Here are some practical steps to bring this vision to life. 1. Create international standards for conflict resolution training. The United Nations or a similar international body could establish a standardized curriculum for conflict resolution. This curriculum could be taught in diplomacy schools and military academies worldwide, covering essential skills like negotiation, mediation, and de-escalation. 2. Integrate training into diplomatic and military education. By making conflict resolution a required part of the education for diplomats and military officers, we embed these skills early in their careers. Institutions such as the U.S. State Department, NATO, and international military academies could integrate these courses as core requirements for anyone in a leadership position. 3. Establish an annual peace summit for training and collaboration. Imagine an annual gathering where world leaders and top military officials participate in hands-on conflict resolution workshops. This Peace Summit could include scenario-based simulations, where leaders work together to solve hypothetical crises, learning and practicing de-escalation strategies. Such a summit would foster cross-cultural understanding and help build a network of peace-focused leaders. 4. Create public demand for peace-oriented leaders. Citizens can play a role by supporting leaders who prioritize peace and diplomacy. Advocacy groups, peace organizations, and NGOs could promote conflict resolution as a core leadership skill, encouraging voters to consider these qualities when electing leaders. A strong public push can help make conflict resolution training a standard expectation for anyone in power. A call to action. Championing conflict resolution skills. You, as a reader, have the power to advocate for a world where peace is prioritized. Support organizations and policymakers who champion diplomacy and conflict resolution. Share this vision within your own community, discussing how we can encourage leaders to choose peace over conflict. With enough voices calling for mandatory conflict resolution training, we can create a global movement that insists on empathy and understanding as core leadership values. Consider writing to your local representatives, urging them to support conflict resolution initiatives. Demand that world leaders approach their roles not just as politicians or strategists, but as peacemakers. Together, we can shift the paradigm from one of division to one of unity. Reflection. Imagining a new kind of leadership. Think about the potential impact of conflict resolution training in your own life. If you were to approach disagreements with curiosity, empathy, and patience, how might your relationships and interactions change? The same principles apply to leaders. They, too, need the skills to listen, empathize, and find common ground. Imagine a world where every leader approached conflict with a focus on understanding rather than winning. Picture negotiations guided by compassion, where even the fiercest disagreements were met with patience and open minds. This isn't just an idealistic dream, it's an achievable goal. By advocating for mandatory conflict resolution training, we lay the foundation for a world where peace isn't just possible, it's probable. A vision of the future. Building a culture of peace. This chapter, like the entire vision for Seeds of Peace, is a call to transform how we view leadership. We need leaders who are not only skilled in managing resources and policies but also in managing human emotions and relationships. Conflict resolution training for leaders and military officials could be the key to this transformation, creating a generation of leaders who prioritize peace over power and compassion over control. Through this book, you're invited to dream of a world where peace is practiced, learned, and championed by everyone in power. Together, we can build a culture of peace, one where the seeds of empathy and understanding grow into a world free from war and conflict. Let's plant these seeds now and nurture a future where peace is the strongest form of leadership.